When the war ended, Germany saw many strange things. Ruined cities, starving faces, flags changing overnight. But nothing shocked them more than the men who walked into their streets wearing American uniforms, with skin as dark as the coal dust that still hung in the air. These were the soldiers Hitler said could not exist. And yet, here they were, smiling, feeding children, and turning every Nazi lie into dust. Before 1945, most Germans had never seen a black person. For 12 years, Nazi propaganda painted them as subhuman, as symbols of chaos and corruption. Textbooks, newsreels, even children's comics warned that African blood would destroy civilization. And yet, across the ocean, 1 million black Americans were preparing to fight for that same civilization. When the Allied armies crossed the Rhine in early 1945, over 125,000 black soldiers were among them. Truck drivers, engineers, cooks. Some, like the men of the 761st Tank Battalion, were frontline fighters who had already seen hell in France and Belgium. To most Germans, they appeared like phantoms, men from photographs and whispers, suddenly real, wearing the uniform of the victors. A woman from Frankfurt later recalled, "They walked like they owned the earth, tall, proud, calm. I could not stop staring. We had been told such men were beasts, but they looked like gods." In the spring of 1945, black American units entered shattered towns along the Rhine and the Ruhr. They gave candy to children who hadn't eaten in days. They shared rations with old women who once saluted Hitler. And for the first time, German civilians realized something that no speech, no broadcast could have taught them. The enemy was human and kinder than their own leaders. In one village near Koblenz, a young German boy recalled watching a black soldier fixing his family's bicycle. He said, "I remember his hands. They were enormous, gentle, steady. He smiled when I said Danke. That was the moment I knew everything we had been told was a lie." But these soldiers too carried burdens. Back home, they came from a country that still denied them full rights. A country where they could fight and die for freedom abroad, but be refused service in a cafe at home. And yet, they stood there, in enemy land, acting with dignity that shamed the very empire they had defeated. One of them, Sergeant Horace West, wrote in his journal, "These people look at me like I'm from another world. They don't know what to think. Maybe for the first time, they're seeing what an American really is." Still, not everyone welcomed them. Some German POWs whispered that capture by the black troops meant death. And within the U.S. Army itself, racism followed them across the ocean, segregated barracks, unequal promotions, and white officers who distrusted them even in victory. Yet, as the months passed, something remarkable happened. In the eyes of ordinary German civilians, black soldiers became symbols of strength without cruelty, power without hate. For women who had been warned that race mixing was a sin, many found themselves drawn to these men who treated them not as enemies, but as people. Love stories began to appear among the ruins, forbidden, fragile, real. When occupation began, thousands of Black GIs were stationed in Germany, from Bavaria to Berlin. They built roads, guarded depots, and helped feed the hungry. German children called them Schokoladsoldaten, chocolate soldiers, not out of insult, but affection. And yet the US military tried to erase them from its own victory story. No parades, no medals for heroism, no mention in the history books for decades. But the Germans remembered. In interviews years later, many said the same thing. They were the first Americans we met. They were the first to show us kindness, and they were not what our teachers told us they would be. For the black soldiers, Germany became a strange mirror, a place where they were treated as equals for the first time. One wrote, "In Mississippi they call me boy. In Munich they call me sir." When they returned home, many carried that contradiction with them, the memory of being respected by a defeated enemy and despised by their own countrymen. But in that brief moment, in the ruins of a fallen empire, They had undone 12 years of lies simply by being who they were. Sometimes the most powerful victory is not the one won by tanks or guns, but by the simple act of being seen. History remembers the generals, but it's the forgotten faces, the ones that shattered the myths, who changed the world in ways no bullet ever could.